Okay, we are at 12:02, so I think we will get going. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Welcome to this webinar. We're excited to have Clint Nessmith and Erin Sammis here from Resource Development Group, a Convergent Company, to talk about trends in economic development, fundraising, and how you can leverage your leadership to kind of maximize the opportunities and convert more of those opportunities for your fundraising. So Clint and Erin, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Clint Nessmith. I am a principal with Resource Development Group, a Convergent Company. I have with me Erin Sammis, who is a consultant with our firm. We think we've got some pretty meaty things to sort of dig through today, and are going to walk you through a number of different slides. Feel free as we go through this to drop questions in the chat, and Nathan is going to kind of keep up with those. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the next slide. And let's start with, in case anybody missed the news earlier this year, Resource Development Group and Convergent announced our merger back in March during the IEDC Leadership Summit in DC. And this slide kind of gives you a sense of how the new company operates. RDG, a Convergent Company, which is, I came from the RDG side of the house. We only work with chambers of commerce and economic development organizations. That has historically been what RDG is focused on. We were primarily the mid-size and larger market firm. Convergent also has been in that space, but they tend to focus more on the single county entity EDOs and chambers, and that's one of the reasons this merger is really a match made in heaven. So that we still have this one division that's all we focus on. Convergent, the parent company, also focuses on higher ed fundraising and sort of traditional nonprofit philanthropy. But this merger brings together some really talented teams. Certainly the largest team within the space, and research and data that really I would say is truly unmatched. So we move on to the next slide. This gives you a sense of some of our current and recent clients. Again, different sizes. Collectively, we've raised well over $2 billion for our clients over our collective existence of 47 years, all over the country, coast to coast. And then some folks think, oh gosh, I'm a small community. Can I even raise money for marketing or business retention expansion, or if you're chamber advocacy or quality of place initiatives? And the answer is, regardless of the size community, we can show that there is an impact. And that's why I love this graphic so much, and that it does truly show, the outcomes of markets large to small. Next slide. And this will be the last slide about us. Just for your awareness, most people think of our firm as a fundraising management firm. That is truly truly is a core of our business, along with feasibility studies to inform those campaigns. But I think it's also important to note that if revenue is involved, we can probably touch it and impact it, whether that be best practice studies or peer organizational comparison studies. We're going to touch on one of those actually here in just a minute as we get later into the deck, or investor relations management, or even building a revenue model. I actually just wrapped. I'm in the closing chapter of building the Greater Omaha Chambers revenue model for their economic development campaign, as just an example. And then we also have investor engagement tracking software that's built into the software we own, that we built, that we use to track campaigns. And so we've just added this extra piece to it, which a lot of EDOs and chambers love, having something that can track that engagement throughout a funding cycle. So that's a little bit about us. If you didn't know, we'll move on into the next slide. And Erin, I think this one's yours.
Yes, thanks, Clint, and thanks, Nathan and Golden Shovel, for having us today. Before we get into the real bulk of the content, I'm just going to take a moment to go over some really what I think the fundraiser in me. I get really excited when I see this. So, what we're looking at is the Giving USA 2025 report that tracks total charitable giving in the U.S. from 1984 to 2024. And what you're looking at is, giving over time. The gray bars are inflation adjusted dollars. The gold bars are inflation adjusted dollars in recession years. And then you'll see the current dollars. All of that's to say the line trends upward. So charitable giving has been remarkably resilient over time. And while there have been years where giving has slowed or flattened, this is a consistent trend in the marketplace. And in fact, when we're looking at the 2024, this $592.5 billion in charitable giving is the highest we've ever seen. So this is really encouraging because the dollars are out there, generosity remains strong, even when markets are uncertain or challenging. The flip side of this is that there is fierce competition for these dollars. In 2025, there were approximately 1.9 million nonprofit organizations registered in the United States. So every one of those organizations is competing for these dollars. So the question is, it's not whether the dollars are available. They currently are. It's how do you stand out and tap into the dollars that fund your mission and make a difference in your community? So this next slide looks at where the money is coming from and where those dollars are being distributed. So again, $592.5 billion. About 2/3 of that is coming from individuals, 19% from foundations, 8% giving by request, and last but not least, 7% by corporations. And while you might say, well, that's the least, let's remind ourselves that that's $44.4 billion annually. And I also want to point out that the giving by corporations increased a remarkable 9.1% year over year. So that's some really exciting, trends, particularly for those of us focusing on economic development and chambers of commerce, because corporations tend to be our primary audience. But let's not forget the important role that foundations play, and in some cases, even individual giving. On the right side, where did the charitable dollars go? First and foremost, religion is at the top, and then we go to health, human services, education, foundation, public society benefit, health, etc. Now, we don't see economic development on here as a category, but what we all know, and our job when we go out to fundraise, is that economic development is an umbrella that captures many of these components. As Clint showed earlier, some of the things that we raise money for: affordable housing, infrastructure improvements, site readiness, along with business attraction, retention, expansion. So while these two slides make me very excited to think, oh my gosh, $592 billion, and they're giving more and more every year, the challenges are real and there are opportunities. So Clint's going to bring us back to some of the things we've been seeing specifically in the marketplace as of late.
Thank you, Erin. So I think everybody recognizes that the last 18 months has been a little bit challenging when it comes to raising money or bringing in revenue, particularly if that revenue has a source at a federal grant level. You combine the pullback and the pauses in federal grants with the market uncertainty last year that the tariff situation certainly caused amongst many of our funders, and it led to a lot of challenges. And because there was less dollars coming into markets around the country, you were seeing increased community need, creating this additional strain, and more nonprofits out trying to fill gaps and find money from new places. Grants have certainly been under assault. It's starting to quiet down a little bit, and actually even in the last 2 weeks, I've heard some pretty positive stories about some new opportunities that are out there, but I think, we can assume that we're kind of in a different landscape today than we were 18 months ago on this front. But there is opportunity, and looking for that opportunity from a federal grant standpoint or a state grant standpoint where you've got federal dollars sort of seeding that. There is opportunity out there. Um, the I can tell you, I told our team back in December because I knew that last year a lot of folks needed to raise money, but didn't, or folks that had never raised private sector dollars were deciding, oh, I've got to go out and do that. I've got to kind of build another leg of the stool. Well, what that's led to, and what I predicted at the end of 25 is that 2026 is going to be extremely busy, significant fundraising year because if you're a nonprofit, you're out there raising money almost certainly right now because you're trying to backfill what you experienced last year. So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of hands out, and I'm sure anytime you ask for money, people folks are saying, oh, well, I get 3 to 5 to maybe even 10 requests a day. The nice thing is that chambers and EDOs are in a prime position to really illustrate our value proposition and our ROI at really any given time, especially though during challenging times. We speak the language of business. We measure everything that we do, just like our funders do. That allows us to sort of rise above the noise and really stake our claim as to why our funders need to be funding our work. So, speaking of our work, let's dig into a couple of slides that were taken from a peer chamber survey that we did for the Detroit Regional Chamber at the end of last year. We talked to, there were 16 chambers from around the country that participated in the survey, and it was a survey that dug in both on revenue and as well as on strategy. So the two slides I'm going to show you today are really strategy related. But I think it's important to see how the chamber community, many of whom have economic development under their umbrellas, or sort of what they're thinking about right now. And one of the questions that we asked was, as you project ahead over the next 3 years, what are the biggest challenges that you think your regional economy is going to be dealing with? Not surprisingly, on one hand, workforce continues to be one of the number one concerns, right? I mean, we know that we've got a demographic cliff heading our way. There's less kids being born. There are going to be less workers. Workforce has been a primary concern just about every place we work for years now. What was interesting about this is that there was an intentional breakout of K through 12, improving K through 12 outcomes from workforce alignment with market needs. And so now, we're beginning to be a little more granular as to what we mean when we talk about workforce. The other interesting piece of this is growth related issues, whether that be infrastructure or transportation or energy. There's a lot of concern around how communities are going to handle these sorts of challenges. Because if you can't come up with solutions, then you're gonna lose out on opportunities. So those are the big three. But interestingly enough, you look over here under the single mentions, and there's some over here like AI's impact, childcare, homelessness, federal funding for higher ed and medical operations. I suspect many of those are going to rise in importance, as we look at the years ahead. So I think that's just kind of the start of a look into where we're kind of going to go. And then you go into the next slide, and we ask these same chambers, well, look at your current strategic plan, or maybe you're doing a new strategic plan, and tell us what your primary core pillars are within your strategy. And of course, we were interested in seeing are these chambers addressing these challenges that they've just cited? Well, 71% have economic growth and development within their plans. Well, that was interesting to me because about half these chambers had economic development under the umbrella. The other half didn't. This is 71%. So almost 3 out of every 4 are working on economic growth and development. It just shows what when you think about the challenges that fall under that, right? I mean, that just shows how important that is. You see talent and workforce there, and at first you say, wait a minute, 57%, that doesn't really match with the previous slide. But again, people were getting a little more granular and into the weeds. And so you see talent and workforce there, and then you look down at the bottom of that left row, you're also going to find education, innovation, and improvement. So you put those together, and again, you're kind of right back up there around that 70% focus area. So that's interesting. Quality of place and livability certainly ties into what we were just talking about a minute ago around transportation and energy and infrastructure. Not surprised to see advocacy there. Again, that's what chambers do. And so that's interesting to me. That tells me that, yes, markets are responding. We're trying to address the things that are kind of the biggest pain points. Then, just like with that other slide, I'm gonna look over here at some of the lower mentioned items because I think that they're going to become even more important as we look ahead. Let's start with AI. Again, AI is it's an opportunity and a challenge, right? And we're going to be in the middle of it. In many cases, we already are. We, the industry, are going to be in the middle of it, and trying to help our investors, our members, our community take advantage of AI while also sort of defending against the potential negatives around that. So I suspect that's going to become a bigger priority. If you look around the country at who's doing that well early, like right now, the Dallas Regional Chamber is doing a phenomenal job bringing in an AI suite of services and support to the Dallas market. The other one that I am particularly interested in is minority business growth. And the reason is because we've all seen that there is kind of an assault on DE&I programming over the last 18 months. And that caused many chambers and EDOs to sort of change up how those programs looked, how they were defined. Historically, where you would usually see minority business growth programs focused on would be helping women, minority, and veterans start up companies, right? Be entrepreneurs, get a new company off the ground, that sort of thing. That's not going away, but there's a new element. And that new element is actually tied into the silver tsunami, which we think about with inheritance, but it's also connected to family-owned businesses. And as someone that talks to family-owned businesses all over the country, I regularly talk to folks that are maybe they're a manufacturing operation and it's been a family-run entity, but there's nobody to take it over in the next generation, and people are starting to think about retiring. And so they've got a couple of options. One, well, we just close the business and we walk away, or two, we sell. Well, if we're going to sell, there's a pretty high likelihood that's going to be from a P&E firm that's outside the market, right? Well, I'm not against P&E firms, but it's never a good thing when decision-making power gets pulled outside of a market. Nobody wins on that front. And so where this minority business growth programming is beginning to shift to is let's help women, minority, and veterans get connected to established companies that are going to be looking to sell in the coming years so that we can keep that company and those executives local. And the Cincinnati Chamber is doing a great job with this. The Cleveland Partnership is doing a great job with this. And I just think it's going to continue to be something that we have to do. I'm working in Erie right now, Erie, Pennsylvania, and this is right on their radar as well. So, I mean, we're just seeing it kind of all over the place. So anyway, I think that's going to become an even bigger deal.
Thanks. So how do you get your position leveraged for long-term success? So picking up where Clint just talked about strategic planning, we feel that long-term strategic competitiveness rests on three factors: sound data, strategic focus, and funding to drive your work forward. And the first step in that process is really having a proactive, long-term strategic plan. And you can have a strategic plan that is, capitalized and informed by consultant reports, or you can do, if you're a small shop, you got to put down what are your activities that you're going to deliver on? What are your priorities over the next year, 3, 5 years? And what outcomes and are you planning to achieve? And what is the impact you're going to make in your community? That well-defined strategy gives you the roadmap, your stakeholders, the plan and the confidence to move forward. So from there, you get your plan together, and then you have to look inward. Do we have the resources we need to be successful? And if you can do that on the front end, you'll save yourself and your team all the time, and you're setting yourself up for success. So that's taking a look at your capacity, your resources, your leadership, and your dollars. Next, let's look externally. Again, you can do this sort of informally, or you can do it through a formal feasibility study. So that's taking your plan and your observations about your organization's capacity out to market, saying, what do you think, major donor? What do you think, board member? How do you think this is tracking? Are we on the right track? Are there priorities that you would like us to see addressed? Our firm specializes in doing this and doing it in a way that's confidential. And really sets you up for success, teasing out who might be willing to lead, and how to prioritize things. And that really gets to the next point, is that by doing this vetting, you're able to align what you and maybe your leadership team thought were the priorities with what the market is really saying they're ready for and what they see. So this is really our framework for how to move forward. And it's really important to pay attention to all of it, to not skip the steps. Clint, is there anything else you want to add on this one?
I don't think so.
Great. All right, so now we're going to dig into leveraging volunteer leadership, which is, we kind of touched on your capacity, your internal readiness, but then also the external stakeholders. So volunteers matter, and in particular, when it comes to fundraising. We consider volunteer leadership the multiplier of every successful campaign. So what do volunteers do? First, this peer-to-peer credibility is the first thing that we think about. They respond to business leaders respond to other business leaders, and a peer asking for support carries so much more weight than any presentation or ask we as staff members or even consultants can make. They influence major employers and civic leaders, so they often have these relationships already in place. They open the doors and the conversations that otherwise might take us months to develop. They can validate your case for investment. So when they're willing to invest their own time, their reputation, their financial support, this is such a way to reinforce that the initiative, your organization, is something that the prospect should be considering. Fourth, it helps reduce risk. I mean, this is kind of a lot. All of this is sort of intermingled, but they want investors want to know who else is involved, and if so and so is involved, well, then that's less risk to me. It gives them confidence to move forward with community support, and last but not least, it moves things forward faster. When you have someone with a trusted relationship making that ask, decisions get made faster. Saves you time on the back end, and we know this to be true in our everyday life. When you trust a brand and you trust a person, you're like, absolutely. That credibility really matters. And volunteers, they bring it in a way that, you as a staff member or we as consultants can make. So we feel volunteer leadership is essential and not optional. Clint, you want to talk about this cartoon?
I love this cartoon because this captures everything on the slide. Because if you have the right leaders around the table, whenever you're getting ready to raise money, or even if that fundraising effort is even a couple years away, because you need to kind of bring your leadership along sometimes. If you've got the right leaders around the table, it maximizes everything. It maximizes the amount of money you're going to be able to raise in the marketplace. It sometimes maximizes your fundraising goal. And this cartoon is actually from even before when I started working here. This is probably about 25 years old at this point. from Ford Atlanta campaign and from the late 90s. And what you see here are Rob Radcliffe and Mike Tribbiano on the left. That they founded RDG, did a feasibility study for Ford Atlanta, said, all right, $14 million is where we think the market is going to be for this campaign. But then you've got the chamber staff. For those of you that have been around long enough, you may remember Janice Rise, who's still there, Bill Hubbard, who's still in the Atlanta market, and Sam Williams. But here's staff going, hey, listen, we need more than 14 million. We need 16 million. Or Sam saying, hey, we need 18 million. But Bill Dahlberg, he was the big guy in town at that point in time. And Bill was our key leader. He was the chair of the chamber. And he said, no, $20 million. Well, guess what? That's what we raised. We raised $20 million from Ford Atlanta. And so, again, that's what having somebody the caliber of Bill can do for you. And you don't just have to be in Atlanta to get that. Every community, if you can tap into them, has a Bill Dahlberg. And it's just a matter of engaging them and getting them excited and getting them willing to help sort of lean into your fundraising work.
So Clint, you've given us some good background here. What is the ideal leadership profile? So let's talk about this. So typically, it's someone who's respected already in your business, in your community. They should have that credibility. They should be top of mind in terms of name recognition from your board members. They should have credibility with your top prospects, right? So you want to send someone who's liked, respected with your current investors that you want to keep or grow, and those particularly you're trying to approach, right? They have an understanding of the regional economic landscape, so they're familiar with your organization already. They're familiar with your mission, and they can speak the language that you're trying, speak the language of your mission, vision, and to the prospective investors. And if you don't have this person in your organization today, you really need to prioritize this. I mean, this is number one priority, and it may take you a couple of years to bring those folks closer to the table, but it's really powerful when you can make it happen. They themselves are willing to make a visible and early commitment, and that can look a lot of different ways, from their time, their own personal financial investment, but that is really, really key. Folks won't follow unless that your leaders have really invested. They're willing and ready to bring others with them. So they're willing to look through your list. They're willing to look through their list. They're willing to make the call and send out invitations and host events. And so put in the real time, the sweat equity to help you with your campaign. And then lastly, they can really articulate the case for investment. So I kind of touched on this earlier with understanding, but they really need to be able to, succinctly get to the point, and sort of leverage their strong communication skills. And we'll talk a little bit how we help get them ready for that.
We actually just finished working with a client in Florida where we did their investment tiers. We had actually created their investment tiers about 12 years ago, and they really hadn't changed since then. And so we redid everything. Everything increased, and we created a new tier. The new tier was $100,000 a year. Before that, the highest tier they had was $50,000. So whenever we did our feasibility study conversations, it was our goal to find anybody that would go to $100,000 a year so that we could, justify having that new tier. And when we found that individual or found that company, the very next thing that I asked that person was, great, who you bringing with you? Let's start thinking about it, because that's exactly what we needed. And at the end of the day, we have, I think we're up to $400,000 or $500,000 a year investors now for that organization, all because we found that one person that was willing to kind of take that leap and then pull others in.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So what does it take to make sure that this happens? And I think this is really, really, really important to think about from an internal resource capacity perspective, making sure you have this readiness idea. So you have to have a concise case for investment. Why us? Why now? What are the outcomes? and you have to give them the talking points. The number of times I have been asked by a member of our board for something that fits on the size of an index card to train the volunteers to get out and sort of tee up the ask, I can count. I don't have enough fingers, right? So it's really, really important. And oftentimes and if you have volunteers coming in saying, we want to help raise money, you lean into that, give them the talking points, make sure they can articulate the case. And then once you can get them into sort of the active solicitation phase, there's a couple of things we'll focus on. Make sure that they're prepared, right? So give them the background. Don't send them in cold. Make sure they have ask levels, and that they're shooting for aspirational levels, right? They ask specifically for a targeted ask amount, and they're aware of the ideal benefits maybe that come with that align to that prospective investor's needs, interests. Give them a script. Don't assume they know what they're doing. Even if you think they are, lay it out, give them all the touch points that they need. Offer staff support in scheduling and follow-up. And if you can, as much as possible, try to be in the room as a witness. And that's really, really important because there are challenges also when you start to leverage volunteers. So you're beholden to their schedule a little bit, right? You need to be able to respond to when they're available. Sometimes they can kind of veer off topic. They're not professional fundraisers necessarily. They're building on their trust and their relationships. So they're making the ask, but maybe they forgot to say which level, or maybe they might have, misinterpreted what someone was saying. So making sure that those details are captured, the undercurrent of what, tone and body language is there, making sure and that takes you building that trust and credibility with your board member to have you in the room with them. And then finally, they're busy, oftentimes busy executives. And if you're not prepared to do swift and immediate follow-up, sometimes you can lose their attention. So ultimately, all of this is about building confidence and trust with your volunteers, giving them the tools that they need to feel confident, prepared, and supported.
I'll give you a little color on this particular slide too. So we've worked with the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber on all but one Forward Oklahoma City campaign. And at this point, I think we're up to six. I think we're up to six, five or six, enough where I'm starting to forget how many campaigns there have been. And this particular campaign that we wrapped up last year, we handled the leadership a little bit differently. And there's this one individual in market who's just kind of the godfather of Oklahoma City. He's always been there. He's always pushed everybody to do more. But his role is a little bit different now. And there's been a lot of leadership transition in the market. So even a lot of his peers have kind of moved on. And so the campaign strategy we employed was we asked this leader to make the top 20 calls. And the top 20 calls was anybody that we thought had the capacity to be at $250,000 a year. We gave those to this person and we said, all right, these are yours. We're going to go and we're going to focus on everybody else. Well, what was a 12-month campaign timeline initially ended up being an 18-month timeline. Well, why is that? Because this particular leader travels a lot. And when he was in town, he would do 1, 2, maybe 3 calls. And then there might be months that would go by before the next 1, 2, or 3 calls were made. Now, our timeline and his timeline weren't great matches, but we knew this was still the right way to go. We knew this was still the right strategy, and in fact, it was. And eventually, we got where we were trying to go. It just took about 6 months longer. But that's just a great example of you got to be a little bit flexible sometimes whenever you're really relying on your volunteer leaders to really carry the water on some of these asks.
Pays off. Okay, Clint.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about raising money and either sort of passively or proactively, there's some things that you ought to be thinking about right now. Recognizing, again, as Erin highlighted earlier, that competition for money is extremely high and only getting higher. And there is still market uncertainty. I mean, we're working in St. Clair, Michigan right now. And when the 10% tariffs on Canada were announced last week or 2 weeks ago, I mean, that added market uncertainty to St. Clair County because I mean that's a right there on the border, and so that's just one example. There's uncertainty still, and there's some things that we can be doing to really increase our level of success. So one would be to make sure that you're maintaining consistent communication with all of your current investors. Communication is almost always the number one area of improvement cited in a feasibility study when we say, how can our client get better? Communicate better, communicate better, communicate better. And it's not that you're communicating poorly, it's just that it's harder to get your message through all the noise. But be communicative with your current funders, but also recognize because uh, a family-owned business might decide to close because the owner is going to retire, or because you may get a new CEO in town that is going to replace a 25-year CEO that's always written you a check for a large amount of money. Because of there's a lot of changes going on, you can't always count on those same people to write you that same check that they always have. So make sure you're allocating bandwidth to diversifying that funding. Proactively based broadening, bring new folks into the fold. That's incredibly important. Protect your back end, right? I mean, that is something that when we manage a campaign, we handle all of that in a very short period of time. But that doesn't mean you can't be doing that all the time, whether you're in a campaign situation or not. Two would be to make sure you're developing relationships with multiple leaders at each investing organization. Again, you got a lot of CEOs that are deciding, I'm done, this is hard, I'm going to go retire. And then they leave. And if you don't have relationships with other people in the C-suite or amongst the executive staff, you might lose that funder with whoever comes in and replaces that person. So make sure you are building out those relationships, 2, 3, and 4 people deep within the company so that you've always got those advocates there. Matter of fact, on our letters of intent now, very frequently, we will have on the back, we will be asking for contacts within a committed company so that our clients can begin to catalog those and start building those relationships. So we kind of do that proactively. 3, there would be to understand your positioning. This is all about unique value proposition. You've always got to highlight your unique value proposition. What are you doing that nobody else is? What has occurred that would not have occurred had you not been doing your job? Showing that unique value proposition is incredibly important in a noisy ecosystem, but you got to keep it simple and concise. This goes back to 7 minute or second, excuse me, I wish it was 7 minute, 7 second attention spans. It's got to be something somebody can look at and they can get immediately. And so that's an important thing to do. But related to that, you've also got to show how you are integrating and dovetailing into the economic ecosystem because with all the hard issues that we're being asked to address nowadays, and you think about again homelessness and housing and childcare and so on and so forth. We can't be successful if we're not engaging with other nonprofits within and partners within our ecosystems. And so, yes, here's our unique value proposition, but here's also how we're leveraging the work of our partners. That's incredibly important. Also, be thinking about we tend to have workforce development strategies or business retention and expansion strategies, and you kind of think about it sort of the same. It's kind of the same solution for everybody. It's kind of tends to be how I feel like we always think. You got to recognize that if you've got like a headquartered company, particularly a large headquartered company within your geographic area, their needs may not be quite as aligned with everybody else. And so you think about like a headquartered company, like in Lehigh Valley. We're working with Don Cunningham right now, and they've got a number of headquartered companies there in the valley who said, "Listen, we're trying to bring in back office accountants, financial advisors, so on and so forth. Who's helping us with that?" And that's a very special need, a niche need that we have, and many of those companies are writing a large check to our client. So take the time, particularly with those sorts of operations and those sorts of funders, to make sure that your strategies are tailored to meet their needs, so that you can keep them in the door and maybe bring them up an even higher investment amount. And then lastly, I would also suggest that you look at your funding model. When was the last time you looked at your funding model? When were your membership tiers or your investment tiers created? When was that revenue model put together? Was it 5 years ago, or was it 10 years ago, or was it, oh my gosh, 15 years ago? If it's been a while, it probably needs to be updated. And the great thing is that we find when we test updates, we can put the sort of reasoning behind it where there's really not that much pushback anywhere. And so look at what you've had, look for improvements, but also not just from a investment level standpoint, look at your engagement opportunities. Your funders want peer-to-peer, be in peer-to-peer conversations, talking about important things, and they want information. And if your engagement opportunities for your funders don't offer that, I guarantee you're sub-optimizing on the money that you're raising. And this is something we spend a ton of time on with every one of our clients, and it always reaps benefits. So with that, we've got a few minutes for questions. Do we have any?
We got a couple here, and if anybody else has some they want to add into the chat, the Q&A, feel free to do that. One question here: you talked about the importance and the value of having volunteer leaders engaged in your campaign. Obviously, the people who you're going to want to have as part of the campaign are probably going to be pretty busy with other things. How do you make that case to them and get them on board? How do you what do you approach them with this to make them realize this is important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that, you do have to be very smart with their time, and you need to promise them up front you're going to be smart with their time. The old model of, hey, volunteer leader, come with me on 10, 15, 20 separate calls doesn't work today. It just doesn't. Matter of fact, we, in the campaigns we manage, we use what we call executive briefings, where we have our host, which is a CEO or top executive in a market, actually invite in people within their network, and maybe they're not in their network, but they invite in folks. They come and sit around the boardroom over the course of an hour, where our client and we can lay forth, here's what we're doing, here's how much it's going to cost, here's how you can engage. So in an hour, instead of going, kind of dragging folks around town, this same CEO, you're having 8, 10, 12, maybe 15 people come to their boardroom for an hour where they can touch all those folks all at one time. And it works really, really well because it's taking their time constraints into consideration. So doing things like that is incredibly important. The other is just a promise that you're going to help them with follow up. And yes, if you can go make the ask, and we're gonna sit here and we're gonna support you to make sure that this is not just one more thing on your list of things you have to do. We're going to be able to come in behind you and help make sure that this happens. And again, anything you can take off their plate is always appreciated. But I mean, I've had some of the CEOs for some of the biggest companies in the country that have been our campaign leadership, and are almost all are willing to give you an hour or two for one or two briefings.
Great. Other question: you talked about the importance of communicating with the people in your community. Are there forms of communication you find most effective as you're kind of building
You got
those
to
relationships? Is it phone calls, emails?
you got to do it all, but the single best way to communicate is to sit across the table from the person you're talking to, and that's when they're going to hear you. Because otherwise you just cannot be guaranteed that anybody reads anything. And email is becoming horrible, a horrible communication tool because we're all inundated with emails. My guess is I probably got 50 new emails since we've been on this webinar. And when we're in that situation, what do? You just, you only address the things that are most important, and then the rest kind of gets, you don't really look at. And your communications are under threat of being sort of categorized that way amongst very busy people. So again, um, small group updates, one-on-one updates. That's the single most effective way, but also you got to do everything else. You got to do the newsletter. You got to do the webinar updates. You got to do the social media. You got to do it all because everybody takes in their information differently these days.
Yeah.
And I'll just put a point. You can't be afraid to pick up the phone. Emails just don't cut it if you're doing that one-to-one outreach. But it all has to happen.
Great. We do not have any other questions. So obviously the sign of a good presentation, everybody got the information they needed. I will say that we will send out the recording of this presentation after the fact. So if you want to watch it again, or if you have somebody who you think could benefit from seeing it, you feel free to share it. Otherwise, Erin and Clint, I appreciate your time being here, and I appreciate all the information you've been able to share with our audience.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks,
you.
Nathan.